Welcome to the Chronicles of Rome. Episode 10, the First Samnite War, Rome Answers the Call. In the spring of 343 BCE, Rome faced a decision that would pull it deeper into the tangled geopolitics of the Italian peninsula. Decades had passed since the sack of the city by the Gauls. In that time, Rome had strengthened its walls, reformed its army, and extended its reach into neighboring territories. But what lay ahead was not a defensive campaign. It was a new kind of war, a war of alliance, of influence, and of shifting loyalties. A war that would mark Rome's first major step into southern Italy. The invitation came from Campania, a fertile and wealthy region south of Latium. Its cities were rich in land and culture, but often divided and politically unstable. Chief among them was Capua, one of the largest and most affluent cities in Italy. Capua was famous for its chariot races, temples, and commerce, but its military strength had waned, and now it faced a dire threat. To the east, high in the Apennine Mountains, lived the Samnites. These were not city dwellers, but a confederation of fierce semi-nomadic hill tribes who had long resisted conquest. The Samnites were warrior people. They farmed small plots, herded animals, and raised their young in the art of endurance. Their strength came from the land, steep, broken terrain that trained them in guerrilla tactics and ambush warfare. Their warriors were agile, their society decentralized, and their pride unyielding. In 343 BCE, Samnite warbands descended from the hills into the plains of Campania. They struck hard and fast, capturing outposts and threatening the city of Capua itself. The Campanians, caught off guard and without a reliable army, sought outside help. First, they appealed to the Latin League, then to the Etruscans. Both declined. Finally, they turned to Rome. The Roman Senate debated fiercely. Aiding Capua meant more than sending troops. It meant stepping into a region outside traditional Roman influence. It also meant making an enemy of the Samnites, who were not yet Rome's direct rivals. Some senators argued for restraint, but others saw opportunity. Campania was rich. Its cities were vital trade centers. And if Rome could protect Capua, it could win a powerful ally and perhaps establish a permanent foothold in the south. The decision was made. Rome would send aid. The First Samnite War had begun. 3 Roman armies were raised. The consuls for the year, Marcus Valerius Corvus and Aulus Cornelius Cossus, would lead the campaign. Marcus Valerius Corvus was a rising star. A war hero with a reputation for personal bravery, he had once, so the story goes, defeated a Gallic warrior in single combat, aided by a raven that landed on his helmet and attacked his opponent. Whether true or not, the tale gave him his name. Corvus, the Raven. Now, he led legions south into Samnite-occupied territory. His first major battle took place at Mount Gorus, near modern-day Pozzuoli. The terrain was difficult, rocky hills and dense groves that favored the Samnites. But Corvus adapted. Drawing on the flexibility of the new Manipular legion system, Rome's first real battlefield test of its post-Gallic military reforms, he used the 3-tiered Roman line to maximum effect. Hastati engaged first, probing the Samnite front. Then Principes moved in to stabilize the line. When the Samnites attempted a flanking maneuver, the Triarii held firm, forming a bulwark. The Romans won the day. The Samnites retreated, and Corvus secured the region. The victory was widely celebrated in Rome and cemented Corvus's place in history. Meanwhile, the other consul, Aulus Cornelius Cossus, marched through the Apennine passes. His goal was to threaten the Samnites directly, drawing them away from Campania. But in the mountains, the terrain turned against him. His army was ambushed and nearly destroyed. It was then that a young military tribune, Publius Decius, volunteered for a daring mission. With a hand-picked detachment, he led a nighttime maneuver through a narrow defile, occupied a nearby hilltop, and created enough of a diversion to draw the Samnites away. Cossus's army broke through the trap and rejoined the Roman lines. Decius would later be hailed as a hero, not just for his bravery, but as an early example of Roman self-sacrifice. His legacy of devotio, of giving one's life for Rome, would come to define an entire generation of Roman martial ethos, reaching its climax in the Latin War. Another significant engagement occurred at Suessula, where Roman forces clashed with a large Samnite raiding party. The battle was chaotic, but Roman discipline prevailed. What made Suessula remarkable, however, was not the fighting, but the aftermath. Roman soldiers captured vast amounts of Samnite equipment and supplies, reportedly enough to equip an entire army for the following campaign season. It was a logistical triumph. But while Rome was winning battles, the Samnites remained resilient. They were not a centralized power, and their use of terrain to their advantage allowed for more fluid styles of engagement. While later conflicts emphasized their reliance on ambushes and mobility, some historians infer that even in this early war, Samnite warfare challenged Roman patience through irregular tactics, if not full guerrilla warfare, then certainly by avoiding the kind of traditional confrontations Rome preferred. By 341 BCE, the war had reached a stalemate. Neither side had secured a decisive strategic victory. Rome had proven it could fight and win outside Latium, but it had not subdued the Samnites. The Samnites, for their part, had bloodied Rome but could not reclaim the Campanian plains. A peace treaty was signed. The Samnites withdrew from Campania. Capua remained under Roman protection. In the aftermath, cities like Capua were granted civitas sine suffragio, citizenship without the vote. This created a new class of semi-citizen allies, bound to Rome through law and obligation, but without full political rights. It was a compromise that extended Roman influence without granting equal status, and it laid the groundwork for Rome's system of layered citizenship across Italy. This outcome also demonstrated a new kind of Roman diplomacy. The First Samnite War was not a war of conquest, it was a war of strategic positioning. Rome had intervened decisively, protected a wealthy ally, and then pulled back without direct annexation. Yet its presence lingered, its influence grew, and its power was now acknowledged well beyond Latium. Modern historians view these events with a degree of skepticism. Our main narrative source is Livy, writing centuries later, whose accounts blend history with patriotic storytelling. Archaeological evidence for the First Samnite War is limited, and many scholars consider parts of the campaign semi-legendary or retroactively shaped by later Roman values. Still, the war fits a broader arc, the rise of Rome from a regional power into a dominant force in Italy. The Manipular Legion had passed its first great test. The Roman Senate had demonstrated resolve, and Rome had begun to redefine what it meant to be an ally or a subject. But as peace returned to Campania, the foundations of another war were already shaking. The Latin League, once Rome's partner in defense and expansion, began to grow restless. Its member cities had watched as Rome acted independently in Campania. They questioned whether Rome still saw them as equals or as subordinates. Some Latin cities demanded shared control over military decisions. Others sought equal access to the spoils of war. The old alliance was fraying. In 340 BCE, a coalition of Latin cities prepared to challenge Rome directly. They were joined by allies of their own. It was not a foreign war, it was a civil reckoning. But remember this, before Rome commanded legions across the breadth of Italy, before its name became law to distant cities and hill tribes, there was a time when it fought not for empire, but for presence. A time when the Republic marched south, not to conquer, but to prove it belonged. When every victory was still uncertain and every ally a gamble. When Rome answered the call, not because it could, but because it must. It did not annex, it did not boast, but it did not retreat. And from that quiet confidence, a greater ambition began to stir. Rome had crossed a threshold, and it would not turn back. A republic once shaken by invaders now stands taller, wiser, and more certain of its destiny. This has been the Chronicles of Rome. Join us next time as we turn to the Latin War, a final confrontation with the allies who had once marched beside Rome, because now Rome would have to decide whether it was one city among many or the master of them all.